Hi, welcome to another edition of the Music, Money, and Life podcast. This particular episode is a little different than usual. In this episode of the podcast, I'm actually the one being interviewed by a good friend of mine, Michael James. And Michael interviews me in this podcast about my experience for the last 5.5 years of working for myself online. I've recently created a course all about how to work for yourself on the internet, specifically for musicians. If you're interested in learning more about working online for yourself, check out my course. Go to howtolicenseyourmusic.com/online-empire. howtolicenseyourmusic.com/online-empire. And again, this entire interview is about my experience of working for myself on the internet. I share a lot of good tips about how to get started working online. And if you're interested in more, check out my course on my website. In the meantime, let's go to the interview.
Hi, Aaron. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to interview you today.
Hi, Michael. Thanks a lot for doing this. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure. I must say that I'm really impressed with the program you put together. I listened to it, and I went through the program, and I found it very useful and motivational, inspiring.
Cool. Thank you.
And
Thank you.
I was wondering, what got you to this point? What inspired you to actually create the program in the first place?
Sure. Thanks, Michael. That's a good question. So I've been working for myself on the internet for a little over 5 years now, maybe about 5.5 years. And I wanted to put this program together for a couple reasons. Number one, I get a lot of questions from people about working online, and I travel quite a bit, and I meet a lot of different types of people. And it's one of those questions that people always ask, is what do you do? And so, of course, it comes up in conversation all the time. And people are always very intrigued by the fact that I'm able to work online and travel, and I have a pretty flexible, I must say I feel really blessed that I'm able to support myself doing what I do, working on the internet and working in the music business. So I wanted to create this program to address all the questions I get about how I do what I do, but also to provide a formula to sort of explain how other people can do the same thing if they choose. I think working on the internet is a really it affords people a lifestyle that has a lot of flexibility, and which is why I really wanted to do something specifically for musicians and with musicians in mind. And we can get into this later in the interview a little more, but I feel like for musicians in particular, working on the internet provides a very conducive lifestyle, in terms of having a flexible way to bring in money, but also being able to pursue your passion sort of on your own terms. When you're locked into a 9-to-5 job, it can be really, really challenging, as I'm sure you know and can relate to find time to pursue your passion and to make schedules work. When you're playing in a band with multiple people, it gets even trickier. So for me, working on the internet has been, although it's been very challenging to sort of get to the level where I'm at now, which isn't that amazing, but it's a level that sustains me and I'm able to support myself very comfortably. It's a much more flexible way to make money than a traditional job where you have a traditional
you can make your own
schedule.
hours, and that's one of the things that I was really interested in. When I first started listening to it, I was in the same boat. I was trying to find a way to do what I want to do and do the things that I wanted to pursue, but also fit this into my schedule. And I can do this in the daytime. I can do it in the nighttime. So I can make my own hours, and it's one of the things that really attracted to me to this particular business is that I had that flexibility. So I really appreciate the fact and that was one of the things that was very motivational for me, is that I wouldn't have to worry about reporting to someone because I report to myself.
Exactly.
And I can make those hours myself.
Mm-hmm.
But I was also curious too, is when you first started out, what were some of the bigger challenges that you had to face to get this up and running,
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I think like one of the things that I always say is the hardest part about starting an internet business is starting the business. Like, um, being sort of used to working like a traditional 9 to 5 job and then transitioning into being self-employed, um, can be challenging. And it's, perhaps it's the reason more people don't work for themselves and create their own business is it's not necessarily the easiest thing to do, but in terms of like specific challenges, I think it was just getting the business going and finding the motivation to finding the time and motivation to get it started was probably the hardest part, to be honest. Because when I started this business, I was teaching music full time.
right?
I think I was in a relationship at the time. I had a lot of commitments already with my time. So I think the hardest thing was just carving out. I used to get up a couple hours like before my work schedule. I had a pretty cool schedule. I taught guitar from 12 to 8 full time. Like that was my schedule. And so I would get up in the morning, I'd work on the business a few hours, and I'd in the beginning that involved just studying internet marketing and kind of coming up with a plan. And then I'd get home at 8 and I'd work another hour or two depending on how much energy and motivation I had. But I think in the beginning that was just the hardest thing, was just like deciding I'm going to do this. I'm going to put this business together, and then putting in the time that it required to make it happen. That was probably the hardest part.
What were some of the things that you would do to kind of switch the hats? I mean, I find it hard, having a full-time day job, coming back home, right?
Yeah.
And you're tired, you want to
Yeah.
relax, and it's like, what did you do to like switch the hats and kind of almost trick yourself into, like you're starting another job,
Yeah.
but you're doing it in the comfort of your own home? How did you get past that mental barrier and be disciplined enough to continue doing that?
Well, that's a good question. And this is something that I bring up in the program. And this might sound like sort of a cynical answer to this question, but I feel like you need a certain level of dissatisfaction with your current situation. Like you need to be really motivated. And I've never been a really good employee. Like I've never felt comfortable with having bosses and
Right.
being bossed around. And in my past, I've had a few, 2 or 3 in particular, bosses that that really motivated me to want to work for myself. And in my last employment situation, when I was working, full time in 2007, it wasn't a good work situation. It wasn't healthy for me psychologically. So I felt like what really drove me at that point was just wanting to break free of this job I was in, and wanting to work for myself. Like little things like I can remember I wanted to visit my mom in Florida for the holidays, and my boss was, gave me a hard time about wanting a few days off around the holidays. Little
Mhm.
things like that. I remember thinking, this is insane. I'm a 30-something-year-old person at this point, and I have to ask permission
Mhm.
to go visit my mom for Christmas. And I understand this is how, a lot of people are in this situation. But for me, I was just really like, what inspired me was just the thought of not having those constraints. It's almost like similar to what led me to wanting to play music when I was younger. It was this idea of just doing your own thing, doing something that wasn't necessarily a conventional cookie cutter sort of
Right,
approach to
right.
life. It was a similar sort of inspiration, the idea of just breaking free from this mold that people want to put you in. I don't mean to sound too, philosophical, but that was a lot of it, man. I just wanted to be free from that, being tethered to a schedule and a boss and all the things that came along with that.
So I mean, since you started, obviously in 2007 when you were, in between those two worlds, trying to make a name for yourself and get your businesses started,
Mm-hmm.
and kind of in the transition period between, I guess you could say, the former life, of being in that conventional, the business driven mentality of having a boss and everything else.
Mm-hmm.
How did you, what did you focus on in the beginning, as far as, because I know at this point you have many different services and businesses and products,
Mm-hmm.
but what was in the beginning, what was it that you were kind of focusing on mostly that gave you more motivation to come up with more services and more products later on down the road?
In the very beginning?
In the very beginning, what was your main focus of trying to get your business started?
Well, initially in 2007, when I launched howtolicenseyourmusic.com, initially the business was simply a newsletter about the music licensing business, which it still is. I still provide information and resources related to that industry. But in the beginning, I just had a directory of contact information for the business, and a program that I also still sell to this day, 5 years later, called the A to Z of Music Licensing. Those were the first two products that I offered. And and what was your question? What was the motive?
So essentially, this started with a newsletter that kind of like what I guess you can equate to a lot of people doing blogs nowadays and putting up information on there to help others. So in the beginning, it was just an informational newsletter that grew into this A to Z of music licensing, which was a product.
Yeah.
And then from there, it just kind of skyrocketed after that. Is that how it kind of unfolded?
Yeah, basically. I mean, there are different ways to make money on the internet. There are different models, different types of businesses. And at that point, I was very familiar with this idea of having a website, having what's called a landing page, which is essentially when people go to your website, they put in their name and email, and then you send them information, free information related to this topic. In my case, music licensing.
So so it's based off of subscription kind of. They put their email and they subscribe to a newsletter, and then from that point forward, you have them locked in, because whenever you send out your newsletters and the updates, they go to them automatically because they're on your,
I think
list.
It works. This type of business model works particularly well for information products, for things like music licensing, where people aren't. I make this analogy in the course where this is different than if for example, that you want to buy an iPad or an iPod, and you've been exposed, what an iPad is, what it does, and you've made up your mind that you want to purchase an iPad. At that point, you simply go to Best Buy or you log on to Amazon or eBay, and you're already sold. But with something like music licensing and an information product that teaches people how to license music, it's a very different type of product. So you really need to convince people very convincingly
Sure.
that you know what you're talking about. So a newsletter does that very efficiently because it's free. There's really no risk for going to my website and signing up for my newsletter. Some people don't want spam, and maybe people have become more leery about that. But there's no financial risk. You're simply exposed to this information, and you can take it or leave it.
Right.
But I think it's a necessary part of pre-selling products involving information. Information that addresses a problem or need that people have. If they don't know me and they don't know my website, they're not going to just go to my website, take out their credit card, and start buying my products. I mean, that happens a little bit, but for the most part, people need to know that I know what I'm talking about. And so the newsletter is a way to do that very effectively.
Sure. Okay, so how has working online affected your career as a musician?
That's a really good question. I mean, that's a question that I get a lot, and it's affected my quote unquote music career in a number of ways. I mean, initially, when I launched my business in 2007, I had been pursuing a career in music in Chicago for a number of years, for probably close to a decade at that point, and had grown really sort of disillusioned with the music industry and the music business, and was really burnt out on. I mean, at that point, I was in a band where I was paying musicians uh, to perform, and playing for the door essentially for shows. So the bottom line is, I was sort of frustrated with the whole. I mean, in addition to I know this sounds so cynical, but in addition to being frustrated with my job, I was kind of frustrated with music as well at that point. So initially, I sort of stopped playing music for a while. Like I really, when my business reached a point where I could sustain myself from just my internet business. And you remember this, Michael, because
Yeah.
we were kind of hanging out a lot at this point.
And I think I remember some of the band members too.
Probably.
There was a gathering and they came by. And you
Yeah,
introduced me to some of them, and
I had a little going away
Yeah.
party, and if you recall, my initial plan. So I left Chicago and I went to Costa Rica, and my initial plan was to go for 3 months. That was the idea, to just leave Chicago, and just go travel. It was like I always had this dream of like being able to travel around, and like at that point I had left the States twice, maybe, like to the Bahamas, the Cayman Islands, like places like that. But I'd never really traveled extensively. I'd never really been to Latin America, where I
Sure.
ended up going,
Yeah.
or places like that. So initially I just sort of I didn't think that much about music. I had enough money to support myself, and I left, and I just started traveling, right? And that 3 month trip turned into, I mean, I've been back and forth to the States throughout this time, but we're now 5 years later, and I've lived and traveled all over. I mean, I was in Costa Rica, in Nicaragua, and spent a little bit of time in Panama, and most recently the Dominican Republic, as you know. So to get back to answering your question in terms of how it's affected my music career, now, like over the last couple of years, I've made a much more sort of a return to playing and performing and writing music. Last year, I did more live shows than I've ever done in a year. I probably did 150 live shows, a lot of them in the Dominican Republic, most of them. So it's allowed me the freedom to pursue things on my own terms. I still do licensing and have a couple new publishing contracts this year. But now I'm in a much better situation. I mean, I guess, to be honest, like initially, it takes time to get a business off the ground.
Right.
So in the first year or so, I was really just, I mean, in addition to kind of traveling around, I was also very focused on making sure the business remained viable. And that took up a lot of my energy. So now, over the last couple of years, I feel like it's freed me up much more. But there was sort of this initial investment of time and
well,
energy.
that's understandable. But now you get to go back to your roots and do what you love, for your passion, which is playing music, writing music. And I mean, I think any musician would only dreams of being able to have the freedom to do that, but be financially independent at the same time. I mean,
Yeah.
that's an amazing accomplishment.
Yeah, I feel like it's a really good, like I really like my situation in terms of, I have my website, I have my business, I have performing, and I have licensing. Like those are really the three sort of things that most of my income comes from, the three areas. And together they work really well, and they're very synergistic in the sense that, like one of the points that I bring up in the program, in the audio portion of this program, is that when you work for yourself, you can really sort of pick what niche, what field you work in. And so it really, like the fact that I'm able to make a living teaching people about music licensing and sort of staying on top of that industry, like it obviously ties in very nicely to my own pursuits as a musician, and
Right.
I've developed contacts over the years and relationships with people as a direct result of running this website that have benefited me, as well in terms of my own music. So, yeah, I think it's a really cool thing to be able to get paid to not only do something you love, but to learn about something you love, which is really what I've been able to do the last couple of years.
And one of the things that stands out in my mind is that, there's a fear factor involved. Anyone getting into anything new for the first time, a new business, or the unknown, not knowing. But you, when you set off to go to Costa Rica, you weren't, that you just made that decision to just take the plunge, not knowing anyone down there, not knowing, having a language barrier, and still going down there regardless of any fear or anything that would hold most people back.
Yeah,
And I think the main point is that when you are getting into something new in some a business venture where you don't know what's going to happen, you have to take that leap of faith to start somewhere. And if you don't take that leap of faith, then you're always going to come back, and it's going to be a vicious circle, because you're never going to break out of your old habits in that comfort zone.
yeah,
And then that's one of the things that, I admire you for, because you were able to take that leap of faith, and it worked out in spades. I mean, it really,
yeah. Well,
to come full circle back to a point where you can sustain your music career on everything that you initially just went out there blindly to do, not knowing what was going to happen as a result.
Well, you touch on an interesting point, because I think there are, I mean, in a lot of ways, when I look back on some of the choices I made, and I quit my job pretty quickly after I started making a little bit of, enough money to sort of support myself on. I left and did this traveling. Different people have different levels of risk tolerance, and I think that there's not necessarily a right or wrong way to go about this. And to be honest, in retrospect, I probably jumped into this a little too quickly. I mean, and we can talk about this. There were some sort of scary moments along the way in terms of, my business fluctuating and getting really low on money. There were some moments where I really questioned some of the decisions I made, but at the same time, there's this expression that necessity is the mother of invention. Like, there is something to be said for sort of forcing yourself, like sort of putting your back up against the wall, and like really putting yourself in a position where you have to figure it out. And I think that if I've learned anything over the last few years, it's that if you have to, like, if you're literally, I mean, I can remember a time when I was living in, and you kind of know the story. I started in Costa Rica, traveled in Nicaragua, and started dating this girl, and decided to spend a few months there.
Right.
Like, I was essentially based out of there for a while. But I can remember literally my account getting down to, I want to say like $80 or $70, like something like a ridiculously low amount. And I'm in a foreign country, and I don't have an extra start. Like, this is my only. Of course, I have parents, and there are lifelines that I could go to if I absolutely had to. But I didn't. That's sort of the point, is that, like, if you're in this situation where you have to figure it out, you will tap into this resourcefulness that you didn't know that you even had. And it's, things have always sort of worked out. In that sense. So it's yeah, again, to get back to your question, like, it's not like there's a right way to do it. Not everyone should leave the country and start an internet business. You can transition into this very gradually if that works for you. But there, where there's a will, there's a way, sort of thing.
Right. And I think it's more or less not necessarily one extreme or the other, but just breaking outside of a comfort zone that you have in your current living situation. That to go past that? Because I mean, why do you think more people aren't as successful when it comes to launching a new business? I mean, what's your take on what's at the heart of that?
Yeah,
You know,
I think that I think that ties into what we were just talking about.
right?
Just this. I think people are afraid of change, and they are afraid of taking risks. And um, I don't know, because there's these statistics like something like 90% of all new businesses fail within the first year or two. Like, you hear these like very sort of scary statistics, and I don't know. I think it depends on a lot of factors. I think it depends on, again, like how motivated you are to actually make it happen. Like, if you know that you have sort of a fallback, like a safety plan,
Right.
and you know that I'm going to dabble in this internet marketing for a couple months, and I'm going to start up this website, and if it doesn't work out, well, I can always go back to my cubicle job. Like, if you have that sort of safety net, then I think it makes people less motivated to really like make it happen.
Exactly. Because in the back of your mind, you're not going to be as motivated because you're constantly thinking, oh, I'm just trying this out. You're not going to take it as seriously. I think it's not going to be something life altering because you're still in your comfort zone. And that's why I think when you took that leap of faith, you broke out of all of the comfort zones that you had. I mean, and in every aspect.
Yeah,
And I think that just forced you into this situation where you could only see the present and
well,
and going forward.
I think that's part of it, Michael. But I think there's also a much simpler sort of part of this, which is the cost of living. In places like Costa Rica, well, more so in Nicaragua, but in certain countries, it is much less than in the U.S. So there's that element too, which it wasn't all just sort of throwing caution to the wind and like running off into the sunset. Part of it was very deliberate and strategic. I realized when I got over to Central America that I can actually live, for a fraction of the cost than at least someplace like Chicago, and still make money because I'm making money on the internet. So I'm not tethered to a specific location. So that ended up being, one of the reasons that I spent so much time out of the U.S. in the initial couple years was because it was actually just more cost effective. Like, the dollar just simply goes further. So it wasn't all just risk taking.
And you did your research and your homework. And I know this because, you would constantly tell me about the economy. You researched a lot about Costa Rica's economy before you even went down there. Where you mapped it out to a certain degree of where you're going to go, where the best places were. And so you hit, obviously when I say you have to take a leap of faith, I'm not saying to take a leap of faith and not do some background research, before that, but you have to go into it with obviously certain information so you have an idea of where you're going to go when you take that leap of faith. So I definitely understand that, I mean, I think fear obviously is the main factor when it comes to launching something new, a new business,
Sure. I would agree with that.
So have speaking of fear, have you had any really scary, difficult moments? I know you mentioned some things, but you mentioned some of the challenges that you had, but like what was some of the scariest moments where you just felt like maybe you should just abandon ship and come back to your previous life, so to speak?
Yeah, well, like you said, I mentioned one of them. I mean, there have been a few of them. So over the last 5 years, I can think of specifically probably 3 different situations where. So, interestingly, my business has really grown in revenue each year since I started in 2007, with the exception of maybe, I think, 1 year it kind of slid back a few $1,000s. But for the most part, if you graphed it out, there's been this very steady rise. not dramatic, but from year to year, my business has made a little more for the most part every single year. But there have been months, it fluctuates a lot. So some months I do really, really well, and then there's months where I don't do as well. And so there have been a few situations. I think the hardest part of working for yourself is just budgeting when you don't know, specifically how much you're going to make from month to month. So there's been a few situations where I just didn't plan things really well, and things got kind of hairy. I mentioned the one period in Nicaragua. There was that situation, and there were a few similar situations where, like, things just got, my account got really, really low, and that's kind of scary when you're in a foreign country and you don't don't have a backup plan, so to speak.
And I think obviously it's normal for any business to go through growing pains. Regardless of where you're at or what you're doing, what type of business is. Well, when you're starting a new business, there's going to be periods where you're going to experience things like that. But at least in this case, I feel that, by working for yourself and having these businesses, you have you have more control over the outcome than if you were in a position where someone else was controlling what was going to happen if you were going through those periods.
Yeah, one of the things that I've learned is business. It's all about cash flow, right? And when you're a small business like I am, my business does well, relatively speaking, now. But it's a small business, and I don't have venture capital. I don't have investors. It's literally just me and a laptop and one assistant. So when you have rocky months, you don't, a big business has debt and capital and investors to fall back on. When you're a small business, you don't have that.
Exactly.
So it's both harder and, the advantage is you are in control to the extent that if you work harder and provide value, and we can talk about providing value, you can affect the outcome of your business, absolutely. But of course, there's going to be challenges. I think that's just. If it was easy, everybody would do it, right? Like if it was easy to start your own business and travel around the world, everybody would be doing it. It's not. So, but that's okay. That doesn't mean it's not viable. You have to plan things.
Right. And one of the things too that I think about too is you have multiple products and services that you've developed over the years. So it's kind of like having insurance. So you have, if one area doesn't do well, you still have something else to back it up.
Yeah.
And so I like the fact that you created this kind of almost foolproof structure where you have many different streams of revenue in various forms. And that, to me, adds that sense of, of security that even in a small business setting, with the low overhead, first of all, being on the internet with all of those businesses and those products, that you build. The more you're involved in these businesses, and the longer that you continue to grow them, the more security that you're going to gain in the event that one or the other doesn't work out. So I like the fact that you have those, and which kind of leads me to the next question is, out of the services and products that you have, which one or two or whatever do you feel that have been the most successful and the most consistent over the years for you?
I would say lately, and when I say lately, like recently, the last year or so, I have so for howtolicenseyourmusic.com, and I know you're pretty familiar with that site, there are a number of different courses and products related to the music licensing niche. I have a mentorship program, which is sort of a more high-end program where I take on a handful of clients and really mentor them about how to license their music. I provide coaching, I do training. There's video training. Programs like this, I have a couple similar sort of programs, have done really, really, really well, and they're sort of my bread and butter. So I think in terms of information product businesses, you need sort of a multiple tiers. You need entry level products to sort of get people in the door and interested.
Like the newsletter and the A to Z.
Well, yeah. So starting all the way from free up to like a $20 product, and then a $50 product, and a $100 product, up to in my case, like it tops out at about $200 for this mentorship program. But I think you need different levels of products, because not everybody's gonna not everyone is willing to fork over $200, right, especially if they don't if they haven't kind of sampled your entry level products. So yeah, I think the mentorship program has done really well. Those types of programs where I work with people more one-on-one and provide training, and valuable training. I've gotten I get really good feedback about those courses and the content. So
very good. Yeah, so that now I would like to actually to get your input on what you feel is what are you going to do next? In other words, what are you going to do going forward? What's the future of howtolicenseyourmusic.com? Like what else can you come up with that you haven't already that can add more value to the businesses that you already have?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think it's not just coming up with things that I haven't already. I think a lot of it is just continuing to do what I've been doing, but to do it more efficiently and continuing to, like, I'm going to continue doing all the programs that I've been offering. The things that, when you find something that works, there's no reason to stop doing that. So all the things that have worked for the last several years, I'm going to keep doing them. But I would like to do, there's a few different things that I have in mind for 2014 and going into 2015. One is live seminars. I think that's sort of the next step for a site like mine, is to do actual in-person live events. It's something that I've talked about doing for a couple years now, and I have one in the works for August or September, potentially in LA. So live seminars, I have a podcast that you know about that I started last year. I'm going to continue doing that. Really, the idea is just to keep doing everything that I've been doing,
just better,
but to do it better. Yeah. I'm planning on redesigning my website. I would like to start offering physical products, like pretty much everything for the last 4.5 years. All of my products are digital, so like things like DVDs and like a physical version of my ebook. So things like that are in the works, but more of the same, but just better and improved.
So I would think that if anyone's trying to start a business up and they're getting into this for the first time, I think that it would be and very beneficial that if it was just purely digital, because then there's less overhead. You don't have physical products to worry about shipping. How would you make it cost effective to offer certain products physical again, but yet still watch your overhead?
Well, here's the thing about digital products, and this will be interesting to see, because I don't know. When I initially launched my website in 2007, I offered a physical version of several of my products and digital. And when I started traveling, I just realized that it's much more efficient to distribute digital information. There's no shipping cost. There's no printing cost. It's almost the most streamlined, elegant business model I can think of. The idea of selling digital information is amazing if you think about it, because once you create a digital product, it's done. There are no, other than your website hosting and your email account, there are virtually no costs to distributing information. Right. And you can also, it's cool in the sense that you can adjust prices to the economy without really, you know, for example, if you manufacture a guitar and let's say your fixed cost is $800 to make this guitar and you can sell it for $1,500, you have a little bit of, you can play with that profit margin,
Sure.
but you still have this $800 fixed cost. You have to make, you have to sell it for more than $800 to profit from, right?
Right.
But when you have a digital, when you have something like an ebook, I can sell an ebook for $50, or, I do these promotions where I bundle all my products together and sell it for $50. I don't lose anything by doing that, but the perception of value is much greater, right? So to get back to answering your question, I would like to offer physical products just to address, there's some people that they still want a DVD, they want to hold it in their hands, or they want a physical book. So I'd like to offer that, but the profit margins just aren't as good. I'll make less selling physical products
Exactly.
than I would digital. It's really that simple.
But obviously, at this point, you can afford to have some of your products physical because of the infrastructure that you've set up for all the businesses already that you have in place, that you've developed over the years. So now, that is something that's a reality for you. You can offer the physical products for some of them and still be able to come out ahead with all the other services.
And it's become much easier over the last few years to print and ship. I mean, you can now, I don't have to warehouse things. You can do things online through sites like Amazon. You can actually print on demand. So it's very simple to do, but again, you're sharing a percentage. If you sell a physical book through Amazon for $20, they're going to keep, like $10 or something from that. So you make less per unit, but that's fine. At this point, it's about addressing demand.
Mm-hmm.
And so that with some of my products, I definitely want to do some physical versions just for people who prefer that.
Okay. And we're definitely looking forward to that, in the coming years. Is there anything that you'd like to, recap or say to the viewers or to the audience?
No, just I hope people get a lot of value out of this program. I hope people realize that this isn't something I'm putting together just to make money. I think that there's nothing wrong with creating a valuable product and charging money for it. I think we live in cynical times. I think there's a lot of people who are very cynical of. And I got an email the other day from somebody who said, because it was something to the effect of, that in response to my free newsletter, it was like, because we live in a capitalist society, why should I know that there's something in this for you. Why are you giving out this free information? Something along those lines. But there's nothing wrong with creating a product or a service that provides value and then charging money for that. Like this is the system we live in. So I think if nothing else, if people have ideas, if people have solutions, if they have something they want to bring to the world, I think this is a great way to go about it. Like we all have to make money somehow.
Right.
Why not create things and like products and services we believe in and put them out there.
Right. And instead of trying to make a quick buck and not caring about having someone else benefit from it, I think that's perfectly acceptable to come up with a service or information and people have value, they see value in it. So I see nothing wrong with being able to make a living off of that. I mean, that's what we're supposed to do. That's the American dream is starting your own business. So that's just, that's natural for someone to feel that way.
Yeah. Well, I think I'll end on this now because I think you brought up one more good point, which is it's fairly easy. If you're good at marketing and you're savvy when it comes to writing advertising, it's relatively easy to make a little bit of money in the beginning. But to create a viable long-term business, you really have to provide value. Like people are not going to keep coming back um, if your product and services aren't good. Like it's really that simple. Like reputation spread online pretty quickly. So I think I would just end on that note. Like whatever you do plan to do it really well. Like don't let money be the motivator.
Right.
Let giving value be your motivation. And if you give value, you'll make money. Like it's almost inevitable.
Exactly. All right. Well, I'd like you. Again, thank you for giving me this chance to interview, and I hope everything works out. I hope you're very successful in 2014 with all your ventures. And thank you.
Thank you, Michael.